So great to see everyone. Thank you for staying a day after UCFIT. We know that is real commitment to the cause. Today, what we wanted to do is really just 1 hour or so of panels and really to focus on some themes at hand, and I'll touch on the theme in a second. But we also wanted to just be a gathering point for people to come together and to be a space to exchange. So you'll notice we have a nice, long, generous networking session after this panel, and that's to really be a space where people can come together and exchange and discuss openly. So welcome to the Blavatnik School of Government. Welcome to the What Works Hub side event on the side event of UCFIT. Today the theme is maximizing impact when resources are tight. I know that is top of mind for a lot of us. Implementation and evidence use in education. I'm just going to throw up a Venn diagram because it's always nice to have some kind of figure to look at. And I want to highlight a few things with this Venn diagram. I think a big topic and theme that's on a lot of our minds is this intersection between rigor and practicality. And one might say that when those things meet, you get impact, right? That's when the results or the research or the evidence is really brought into practice and made real in the real world. And as we know, that intersection is actually not that big in business as usual, right? There's a bit of an overlap, but it's actually really hard to make that overlap happen. And I think a lot of us in this room have been really committed to making that overlap bigger and bigger, but it's very difficult. I think in this new era where indeed actually each individual bubble has reduced, the space for rigor is reducing. There's less money for research. The space for practice is perhaps reducing. Less money, less foreign aid, less of these resources. But if we can make these bubbles converge more, that middle space can still be as big or bigger. So you'll notice, I don't know if you can see it, it's a little bit subtle, but the bubbles on your right are each smaller, but the intersection has become bigger. Because there's more overlap. So I think that's the challenge before us, and the question before us is that possible, and how do we make that possible? If we can make that possible, then we can really deliver the same impact, maybe even more, and in fact, the need for this is ever greater, and that's what this panel is really going to focus on today. 3 actions, and we issued a clarion call on this that we think are exciting and interesting, but would love to have a discussion and debate on this. To make this possible. One is really an extra focus on leveraging the existing resource. There is massive existing resource. As we know, actually, the main resource for most education reform are national government budgets. That's always been the case. That is especially the case now. And also some multilaterals like the World Bank and others. Those are the main resources that are available. And making sure that research, policy, and practice are working together to leverage the existing system and strengthen the existing system rather than operate in silos is really a key way forward. And of course, this has always been important, but it's more important than ever. What does this mean practically? I think for researchers, one thing that this means is doing a little bit less of the perfect, tightly controlled research study over here, and actually trying to attach the best research and method and evidence available to what's happening in the real world, which is often messier, complicated, convoluted, but doing the best we can with the tools we have available to attach to what is going on. So that might look like really embedded ed labs, embedded evidence that are part of the system, that are responding real time, that are meeting the needs at hand. More and better implementation fidelity tracking, so we can see if the existing policy, not a new policy, the existing policy is actually happening, and if it isn't, trying to course correct real time, and then see if that's working through methods like A/B testing, but there could be others. And then also trying to do the evaluation at scale, on the big, messy, at-scale thing, again, rather than the tightly controlled thing. For practitioners, what does this mean? Well, strengthening the system can often feel very big, very intractable. But if you actually think about what is the biggest spend, so the biggest spend is national government budgets. And what's the biggest component of that? It's people time, right? It's teacher salaries, it's their time. That is the single biggest piece of spend. That is the thing to influence. So just making that really practical. If you can help ensure that existing teacher time in the classroom is better spent, is more productive, you have strengthened the system in a big way. You have leveraged massive resource that's already there, that's already recurring every year, and now you've made that more productive. So that's a very practical way of thinking about it. Also, number two, they're prioritizing evidence use in high return areas. So we know FLN can have huge economic returns, and the evidence base on that is only growing. How do we ensure that we're prioritizing these high return sectors that have big economic returns and are important in their own right, and then really use the best evidence available, not reinvent the wheel. We don't need to be constantly rediscovering. We can take the things that we have a sense that work and really embed them in the system and try to match them to the political reality, to say, okay, the politicians really want 1, 2, 3. How do we nudge that to be more evidence-based? It doesn't have to be the perfect, fully cooked evidence-based product, but we can nudge the sort of politically salient thing to be more evidence-based, and always keeping a laser focus on learning. Are we really getting to the outcome? And finally, localization. This has always been critical and really important. It's more important than ever. It also ensures sustainability and groundedness, and that things can persist even when the world is going through upheavals. So I will end there, and I will hand over to the panel and just say the panel will really focus on these themes and these issues. We're really excited to hear from experts on the ground, in multilaterals, among funders. So really looking forward to the discussion today. And as mentioned, it'll be a short panel, and then we'll have lots of time for discussion both in the room and outside. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. And yes, Jonathan, over to you.
So as always, Noam made my job easier. I don't have to cover all the background that I might have considered covering otherwise, but excited to be here today with this panel. So I'm Jonathan Stern. I'm the newly appointed Deputy Director of the Global Education Team at the Gates Foundation. I will say, coincidentally, this is also the first time the Hub has ever asked me to chair a session. And so I just found that amazing. But yeah, so we all know, obviously, about the global learning crisis and now, funding crisis that we're facing. So I'm not going to spend time going into that in detail. I want us to think a little bit more about the opportunity that we have in front of us, right? I think that we have a good understanding of what works to improve foundational learning outcomes, or at least we have an understanding of what can work, right? I think that's maybe an important distinction here. And what we have less of an understanding of is how we can actually get this evidence-based implementation to be taken up with fidelity, and how we can ensure that we are doing this through government systems to the greatest extent possible. All right, so when I was thinking of what might be our approach for doing that, I realized that I don't typically find myself looking to the universe for signs, but on my walk from the hotel into the building today, I thought, what do we really need in order for us to be successful? And I looked around me, and Oxford was kind enough to show me every building with scaffolding around it. And so I think that that's really the place where we are sitting right now, right? I think we're at a point where that is what we are looking forward to, as opposed to just independent project implementation or standalone activities, right? It's really more about the scaffolding of government and how do we ensure that there's fidelity of uptake. And so we have this incredible panel with us today who are actually going to be highlighting the work that they are doing that really is looking at this idea of how we are effectively programming at large scale with and through governments, right? And so I think there was supposedly numbers on our microphones. I don't know if they're relevant in any way, but we are admittedly out of order, so our foundational numeracy skills of counting may not be as strong as a panel of experts, but we do have really fantastic skills and expertise here. So I'll just start with my left and move forward just as brief introductions. You likely already know the panel that we have here today, and so I will keep it brief, although I do have longer bios that, are they on the website? If people click on their names, do they see a longer bio? I assume they do. But Marla Spivack at the World Bank in the Global Education Group, overseeing foundational learning activities and leading some incredible programming there. Great history as a researcher at Harvard as well. Titus Syengo, who is the executive director of TARL Africa, overseeing strategy and mission across the continent, and really leading, obviously, as many of you know, an incredible number of initiatives across sub-Saharan Africa. Anustup Nayak, who's with the Central Square Foundation, a project director, leading classroom instruction and practice. Is that the area? Central Square doing a fantastic job, really trying to change systemic approach to education in India, particularly focusing on marginalized children. Dhir Jhingran, who is founder and CEO of the Language and Learning Foundation, LLF, a nonprofit in India, working really on working through and with state governments to change primary education across the country, and is someone who's been in this field for longer than arguably some people in this room have been alive. So an incredible amount of expertise to share. And Armando Ali, CEO of PAL Network. I don't know if anyone has had the opportunity to be in a room when Armando has chaired a session. If you have, please forgive me for the job I will do today, because it cannot compare to his role as an MC, but also the amount of work that PAL Network is doing across the globe, and particularly in this sector, is a really wonderful thing that we're excited to hear about. So what we're asking the panelists to do first and foremost is just provide us with a little bit of a highlight and insight into what is something that you are doing right now that is ideally scalable, evidence-based, and working through a government program to improve foundational learning outcomes, right? So that is my first pitch to each of them. I think, Dhir, if you are willing, you are first on our list to go. So, sure, please.
So, there are 2 slides there. Good morning, everyone. I'm from Language and Learning Foundation, and slides? Okay. So we work, as Jonathan said, with the governments and also for system strengthening for large-scale FLN programs. And our focus, apart from national level advocacy, is to work with several state governments, 10 actually, to support them to develop curriculum, children's learning materials, assessments, teacher mentors programs, their professional development. So everything that goes statewide into an FLN program, we work with state governments to sort of co-create that. And as you can see, the numbers at the bottom in the table, the second row, are the large numbers because the state governments are implementing the program, and that's where the outreach of these good practices, these new FLN practices, is through the state government's education system. We do work on some demonstration projects at the district level. A district in India is about 1,500 to 2,000 schools. And there again, it's an indirect model. We have a few people embedded in the government system. The idea is that whatever is the government program, how can it be implemented a little more efficiently and effectively, and with learning outcomes that are visible quite soon. Some of these are actually outcomes-based programs or impact bonds as well. But the important thing here is this, that we try to ensure that whatever is learned in these demonstration projects is then mainstreamed through the education system. For example, multi-grade teaching, how does that work? Bilingual education, how is that working in different locations, and what can be then used by the state government at scale? So that's the backdrop. I'm going to try and change the slide. Yes. I've picked up 4 short examples of what has happened at scale through the government and which has been tested somewhat, as Noam was saying, not necessarily very rigorous testing, but which seems to have impact. The first is, and the backdrop for this is, there's nothing new. It is through the government system, the instruments that already exist, just ensuring that they work better or there is an increased priority and emphasis on certain things. So the first is the mid-tier leadership. And we work to, there is a training program that happens for the mid-tier leadership at the teacher-mentor level and administrators. But how can that be more differentiated according to needs rather than one size fits all, based on self-assessments and also, of course, some other external assessments, and also trying to adjust their roles, which are largely administrative right now, to see how instructional leadership can be built in there. Of course, governments have told us the administrative work is not going away. So how do you ensure that at least the instructional leadership gets prioritized? Second, again, in the spirit that there's lots to change in the classrooms. There's a focus on so many instructional practices in the teacher guides, in the classroom observation forms. Is there a way that, based on evidence on the learning gaps, can the government system talk more about some of them, for some time, and then, of course, shift focus if needed, based on what are the learning gaps, so that there is a priority before teachers, and the entire system is messaging that this is very important. For example, children are actually reading, either in pairs or independent reading. A lot of reading time in India, in Indian classrooms, is the teacher reading aloud. So how do you shift that? Also for number recognition and place value, et cetera. So those practices that are highly crucial, that's the focus. And there's consistent messaging, that's the effort. Then through all means, through school visits, through handouts that might go, through training programs, et cetera, so that everything converges there. The third is, in India, the scale is high, scale is large. A state like Uttar Pradesh has got 450,000 primary school teachers, and the training cascade for the in-person training starts with 50 master trainers and goes down to several levels. How do you ensure that they're better prepared at each level? These are minor tweaks. How do you ensure that people can focus on demonstration and practice rather than being didactic and making PowerPoint presentations? So just ensuring that the teacher training, which is anyway happening, is improved, and adding on more elements to it, not just the in-person training. 20 seconds. Is that 1 minute or is that 5? Okay. I'm done. Okay. So the in-person training cannot be very long in India because it's such a large thing. So how do you add elements from a cluster meeting where teachers do get together every month, but they don't actually discuss any academic issues? How do you plug into that instrument that already exists and make it more powerful to support learning? So stuff like that. And the last is, of course, governance. There are block and district meetings that happen regularly. How do you ensure that dashboards are looked at, data is reviewed, and some follow-up is taken on that basis? Thank you.
Thanks, Dhir. Fantastic. We'll have the presentations all together, and then we'll have a bit of Q&A after. But next up, Titus, are you good to go? Yeah. It's your choice if you'd like to sit or stand.
Yeah. And I should just, okay, great. Good morning, everyone. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to be talking about our experience as Tile Africa implementing the Tile initiative on the continent, now covering about 16 countries with our partners. and especially those that are working with government systems, and also reaching about, and it's great to see some of the partners here, VOB and Youth Impact and others. We don't work alone. We believe that this work takes a movement, and that movement has to be of many partners that support governments together. So I will share the experience in terms of supporting governments and the steps that we take to ensure, first of all, that the partnership with governments is strong. That's one. And that decisions are evidence-based across the board. And for those of you that attended some of the UFIT sessions, you saw how there were presentations about how we make decisions based on evidence in everything that we do, because governments do ask for changes when you go with an evidence-based program. But then you need to make sure that you're also assessing those tweaks and changes that you're making to stay within rigor and not to try and error. And that's been basically our Bible, is how we do it. And of course, ensuring that Bible or Quran, for that matter, or any other. And of course, ensuring that we stay within the values of long-term implementation and not just projects. I think the days of well-oiled, well-funded NGO-run programs are over, and that is why we have this conversation today. So our focus, those are the countries that I did mention. So you can see that 16 countries, and we work across all the systems, and we're scaling in 3 core countries, and that is Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Zambia. With Zambia being the one leading in terms of the largest coverage. Zambia has about 10 provinces, and we're covering 9 out of those provinces, with plans to scale in the remaining province this year or next year. And Cote d'Ivoire planning to scale the whole country between this year and next year. And Nigeria, we go state by state, and there are other partners covering larger countries, as I mentioned before, like Madagascar and Botswana and others. So that's how we work, basically. But I just wanted to talk about these interconnected approaches that we use. We look at scale as looking at not just implementing small projects, but scaling the whole country. So whenever we are choosing a country, we look at the ability for that country to scale at least to 75% of the country. And if that's not possible, we do reconsideration. So we don't go to every country. We're thinking about sustainability across the board, and therefore we strengthen government ownership and ensure that this program is actually owned and run and managed and controlled by government and not by just a donor. Again, I say data and evidence continue to be the pillars of our decision making across the board, and system changes across all the levels of the system, from national to mid-level to the local level. And then, of course, we consider costs, because we're looking at what governments can afford and not just what a donor or an external partner will fund. So those are the ways that we support government. Thank you.
Thank you, Titus. I would like to note that Titus saved 30 seconds, but Anustup, you do not get those 30 seconds extra in yours. So.
The bell is scary.
It's a hard enough act to follow Dhir and Titus, so I'll do my best. Can I click on this? So today I stand here not just on behalf of Central Square Foundation, but I stand here on behalf of India. And I stand here on behalf of the coalition that is working with the Indian government, that includes Central Square Foundation, Language and Learning Foundation, Room to Read, Madhi, Vikramshila, Pratham, many others. And today, I want to speak about what I want to call India's Sputnik moment in early learning. When the COVID pandemic struck and we were in shambles, India had one of the longest school closures. I was dying to go back to school when the schools opened. So on the day the schools opened, I took a flight to Lucknow and went to a school not far from Lucknow. And as children were trickling in and I was talking to the principal of the school, I was asking her what has changed and how she looks at her life and the Nipun Bharat mission, which is India's foundational literacy mission. She told me, abhi nahi to kabhi nahi, which means that if not now, we will never be able to establish foundational learning in the country because we have all the right ingredients. We've got this Nipun Bharat mission where the country has prioritized foundational learning, and we've got all the support we need. And in 20 years of my work, I have never seen this kind of momentum. And if you go back to the 1950s, when the Sputnik was launched, the US was taken by surprise as to how the Soviets could deliver such a great scientific breakthrough, and the key was the education system. So what's happened in India? Here's what has happened. If you look at this graph, this is the ASER report, which many of you are very familiar with. The blue line is India, and the red line is UP. UP, as you know, is India's largest state, about the size of Brazil. Every conceivable social and economic problem exists in UP. And this is the graph. You see that India started, literacy in India, close to 25, went all the way, close to 22, 23, went all the way up to 20, maybe 25, 26, bumped it down to 2022, and then you see that jump. The 22 to 24 jump, that's India. But look at UP. It went above the average of India. Same in numeracy. And this is incredible for a country of our size, our complexity. And if we can do it, I think every country can do it, but we need to keep doing it. So what have been our learnings from what has worked well? I think 4 things at a high level. First is goal setting and assessments. We work, Central Square Foundation works with 11 Indian states. Some of my colleagues are sitting here, Partha, Akashi, and many others, and Dhir and his team. In many of these states, we have seen that starting with the chief minister of the state down to teachers, many of them are now clear about what is it that grade 3 children are going to learn. And in UP, these posters are everywhere. In fact, one of our bureaucrats had tweeted a poster which was in a tea shop outside of Varanasi. Structured pedagogy. And I want to show you the teacher actually reading the teacher manual, because very often we see all these things that are inputs, but how do they translate into adoption and output? And many of these states have invested additional support. And this does not cost much, as we've been talking about limited resources. That's just $10 per child and maybe $3 or $4 per teacher. That's the additional input that Nipun Bharat has prioritized for teaching learning materials. System capacity building, Dhir spoke about it. How do we develop teacher capacity? And then FLN monitoring and data. But I want to end with 3 key learnings we've got at the classroom level. The first is good inputs are great. Better implementation can multiply bigger inputs. And these are the LLF and room to read data coming from our districts. You can see that these are really big Alex Abel type effects when the structured pedagogy inputs are going to both the treatment and control groups. But what's interesting is that the control group has also moved. The second thing, if you want to move classroom practice, you got to work on teacher fidelity of use. So you can see there are 4 teacher archetypes, going from a non-user who's never used a lesson plan to an activity picker to a lesson performer and somebody who can orchestrate student learning. You got to move this at the micro level in the classroom. And finally, consistent small practices can change the movement. This is the Room to Read program in Madhya Pradesh. You can see that 10 minutes of practice time moved numeracy proficiency from less than 10% to 60% in 4 months. So I want to end by saying that it is indeed possible to move learning from poor to fair to good. But the journey from good to great, we don't know what it will take, but we are committed, and hopefully with all your support, we can make it happen. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anustup. Armando?
Thank you. I didn't know that I had to jump here, but since this is the pattern, I will do that. It is also a great privilege for me to be here today. Where is
It seems that Anustup has stolen the clicker.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, I'm representing the People's Action for Learning, a network of 17 organizations spread over 3 continents. And you can see in this map, the green sections are where we have some members represented. And I'm happy to be here also today with people from Pratam, from Uwezo, Uganda, Youth Impact, ASER, Nepal, who are also members of this network. So this is the story of all of us. Essentially what we do is to assess foundational literacy and numeracy, focusing on those really basic competencies that allow children to learn more and thrive in life. And this is something that started initially as people's movement, just a group of people going from household to see if their children could read. And it has turned into a movement, a Global South movement, and we really emphasize that identity of being a Global South movement. And we are now spread over all these countries. So our kind of assessments, they focus on the foundations of reading and numeracy. We do our assessments in the homes, different from other assessments who are done in schools, because we believe that in the homes, you will find children who attend the school and children who do not attend the school. In some parts of our continent, we have 2 out of 10 children are not attending schools. So any assessment that is only done in schools is already excluding 20% of the population. We do our assessments using citizens volunteers. So we train people, youth, and those are the ones who go from household to household to see if children can read and do basic maths. In this way, we are somehow spreading awareness about the stage of understanding of the problem, and also engaging more and more people in the look for solutions for the problem that we have. And those characteristics are what identify the PAL network as a leading organization on citizen-led assessment. We started this movement based on the story of our members like 20 years ago. And now we are conducting our first large-scale assessment in 12 countries. Now I will need assistance from our colleagues here to show how we can click this link. Yes. Yes. And this link is just taking us to a dashboard that is showing the different countries that are conducting this assessment currently. But what I want to highlight is, you see different colors in the map. We started the development of this process in 2019 to design comparable assessment of foundational learning. So the data that we are producing this time will be comparable across those different geographies. But we started final data collection in July, and by end of this month, we will be done with data collection in all those countries. So that shows somehow the possibility of conducting these massive, large-scale and cost-effective assessments using maybe also the most cost-effective drivers, the people, and it's possible to have data produced, quality data produced in those 3 months. We are hoping to launch our report in November this year, and you are all invited to Nairobi, where we can publish the results of the global status of foundational learning in the Global South. But I will use my last 10 seconds to highlight 2 points. One is that in all these participating countries, we have a partnership with national bureaus of statistics in the design of the sampling processes to have national representative data. In some of these countries, we are working with teacher training institutions who engage their students, future teachers, to see how you can assess a child and understand the level of literacy and numeracy and the challenges that are waiting for you later. So there are different ways of engaging with government and making this process not only our process, but the process that include everyone who is interested in this product. We have data from citizen-led assessment who are also being uploaded in the National Bureaus of Statistics websites. And now there is this opportunity also from GPE that if countries want to use this data to report on SDG 4 progress, we are very happy to collaborate and provide the data for the government. So we can do this together, and we hope that this will also respond to the challenge that we are facing with costs currently. Thank you for the 20 seconds.
Yes, I didn't even have to tell Marla that she was next. She figured it out all on her own. That's
my numeracy, my foundational
yes,
numeracy.
that was fantastic. I'm very
Really,
impressed.
yeah.
Yes, and last but definitely not least, yeah, please.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonathan. And thanks, everyone, for having us here today. It's so great to hear about the exciting things going on that other colleagues are doing. I was taking notes about what I want to follow up on after. So I am here to talk about the Implementation Science for Education program, which is a partnership between the World Bank and the What Works Hub for Global Education. And I know that the title of this panel was In an Environment of Constraint, which sort of sets us off on a negative tone, but I want to set us off on a positive. I am optimistic because from where I sit, I'm seeing that the push that everyone in this room has been a part of making for the adoption of evidence-based approaches to improving foundational learning outcomes is starting to take root and grow within our partners in government. More and more countries are investing, often with World Bank support, to scale up evidence-based approaches like structured pedagogy and targeted instruction. Just to give some quick examples, in the last year, the World Bank has approved, the board has approved projects in Nigeria to scale up structured pedagogy across a large number of states, a project in Cambodia to scale a structured pedagogy program to all provinces for grades 1 and 3, a project in Papua New Guinea to scale structured pedagogy, and additional financing in Ghana to scale the differentiated learning program there to all schools in the country. So these are exciting developments, but they're not risk-free. And to make these investments count, we need to help government learn how to implement these programs through their systems at scale. Often these are programs that were previously implemented by development partners that now government is taking on, and they're going to do it, but they need to figure out a way to do it at lower cost and through their systems. And so, you know, the countries that are making these investments and the teams that are supporting them, many of whom are in this room, know that they're going to face implementation challenges when they take these programs to scale. And what they're asking for, what they're demanding from us, is a systematic way to understand and address the challenges that they know are coming. So the first step is measuring implementation, and lots of folks on the panel have already spoken about that. But the step after we measure implementation fidelity is understanding why are we seeing the levels of fidelity that we're seeing. And that's where we can help by coming in with tools and approaches to understand technical constraints, managerial constraints, and political economy and mindset constraints that might be producing some of the issues with fidelity that we're seeing in the classroom. So for technical constraints, these are things like sort of the quality of the materials that are being put out. I can't remember if it was Dhir or Anustup's point that, the quality of the material only gets you so far, and after that, it's the implementation. It was Anustup, I think. The implementation is the next stage of that. The quality is there, the teacher capabilities, managerial, things like resources. Do those books actually get to the classroom? And of course, the mindset of teachers, changing teacher behavior and practices is a challenge, and understanding that can help to lead to those changes. So very quickly, I'm not going to be able to unpack everything that's on this slide, but as part of the Implementation Science for Education program, we are looking at each of the needs that's emerging and developing an offer for countries that can help them address that need. So to get through a couple of quick examples, we're seeing, like I mentioned, more and more governments taking development partner developed programs to scale and needing to think about how to plan for that. And so in Nigeria, where that's the case, we're developing a scalability assessment to feed into the planning of the scale up under the HOPE program. There's a need to measure and understand implementation as it's taking place in the classroom to be able to make adjustments. There's a rapid version of that we're going to be piloting in Sierra Leone early next year, and a comprehensive one that we've actually already collected the data this summer in Ghana, and that's feeding into some iterations to improve the implementation of the differentiated learning program that we're going to be A/B testing, actually starting before the end of this calendar year. And then finally, we're seeing a growing demand for cheap and continuous monitoring of implementation as it's happening. Obviously, doing this virtually is the way to make it more cost effective. And so we're experimenting with two different approaches. An app-based approach, which we're hoping to support in Cambodia, where they already have an app embedded in the system for monitoring the structured pedagogy program that had been DP supported previously. And in Ghana, in parallel with the A/B testing, we're experimenting with phone-based monitoring to be using phone calls as a way to be in touch with teachers and head teachers and track progress in the differentiated learning program. So I will leave it there before my time is up, and excited for the discussion with everyone.
So thank you to all of the panelists for those presentations. I know it's hard to sum up an entire organization's portfolio in 5 minutes, especially when there are loud beeps keeping you on track as you move through it. But I think we did a really good job of highlighting some of the core ideas that are underpinning this work, right? I mean, evidence obviously came through very clearly as a theme in all of them, as well as assessment. I think the interest in thinking about scale from the outset was obviously an important thing. I mean, I think Titus might have highlighted that most directly about not even working in places unless there is at least the potential to do so at scale, right? And even just looking at this slide that we have here for Marla, I really love the fact that the first column is need. It's unfortunate how often we may start at the second column of offer. And so it's really nice to be thinking about what is it that we can actually address that is a genuine need in the sector and in the areas where we are working. So I'm going to start by posing one question to all of the panelists to respond to. The title for this session was Maximizing Impact When Resources Are Tight. So if anyone is surprised by the question I asked, that's on you. The question is just broadly and basically, what is your advice to the global community here for how can we maximize impacts in our current constrained environment? Feel free to highlight just one or two key things that you think might be a useful thing to think about, but that's what I think we'd like to start with to get this discussion going. Since you happen to be sitting next to me and looking at me, Marla, would you like to start us off?
Sure, happy to. No, thanks for the question, and I think it's good to direct us to the title of the panel right at the outset. Not to maybe be too obvious about it, but I think that implementation science actually can be a core part of this. And when we think about cost effectiveness, there's the part that's the lowering the cost, but there's also the part that's increasing the effectiveness. And I think too often we focus only on lowering the costs and not on the effectiveness side of that equation. And as I was sort of sharing in the remarks I made earlier, more and more governments are taking these evidence-based policies to scale, and they're investing large sums. They're borrowing, they're getting their IDA, they're investing their GPE compact funds in that. And if they can't, and they're taking these DP-supported programs to scale, if they can't get the implementation to reach the classroom with those changes, then even if they do it at a lower cost, it doesn't matter. They're not getting the return on investment, right? And so I think that this whole field of implementation science and its laser focus on the fidelity is really crucial in a cost-constrained environment. I think that this community actually has a very good case to make for making more investments in what we're doing, and also in a context where, especially for foundational learning, we kind of know what needs to get done. We need to figure out how to help government do it. Government needs to learn how they can do it through their system, and that's, I think, where implementation science can partner with government to think critically about that. And some of the needs here these are just the needs that we've identified in the first year of the implementation science program. So I expect that to really evolve and grow as our engagements with partners expands. I think and one last point, I think the next stage, the evolution of this, at least in my thinking, and from maybe speaking a little bit from the World Bank perspective, is showing more and more, and we're already starting to see this, that government sees the value in working in this way, and in that this becomes more a part of what we mean by monitoring and evaluation, and moving away from the idea that an M&E plan is, from a conversation you and I were having yesterday, Jonathan, actually, an M&E plan does not need to only be a baseline, midline, and endline, and it should not only be focused on the ultimate outcome, but a monitoring and evaluation and learning plan is to be collecting data as we go and understanding the why of the implementation that we're seeing as we go. And that if we can embed that in the M&E, at least narrowly in the World Bank context, we can embed it in the M&E of our projects. Not so narrowly, because we're pretty big. I think that could be a big win. But also, for everyone in the room to be thinking about how are you embedding continuous learning about what is reaching the classroom and why is it or is it not reaching the classroom into your M&E. I think that's a direction that can work on the effectiveness side of cost effectiveness.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marla. I was also wondering if Noam was paying you per implementation science reference throughout that. But,
I'll be cashing in later.
Yeah, exactly. But couldn't agree more with that as an approach. Titus?
Yeah. Should I use this?
They turned it on for you. I think you're good. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think just building on what you've said on implementation science and evidence, I think for me, evidence creates immunity against political changes, and that's if it's solid and objective. Because you want a program. Our experience in Zambia has been that even when governments change, the priorities do not change because it's clear. So that the alignment is also important. If you went to any government today in Africa and you ask them, we have this program, can we implement? They will say yes, right? But I think there is work on us, on the NGO side, to study first the alignment of the ministry before we go there. Because they want the money anytime, but you want to go to a place where the system is aligned. For instance, in Zambia, the ministry had given a circular that all teachers should do remediation and teach kids at their level. But they just didn't know how to do it. So the team that went there were going because there was a solution they had seen that could work for government. So I think looking at that alignment with the ministry could provide the necessary enabling environment for uptake of evidence programs, but also for sustaining that, because governments are interested. And what you want to do is to ensure that that alignment is not just with one person. It's not with the minister alone, because we've also seen cases where the minister is very motivated, but you go below the minister and the program is being opposed at every level, every other level. So I think looking at alignment across the different levels of the system, and if it's not there, figuring out how to get it is a key to this government ownership, sustainability, and government also funding it, because they need to have their skin in the game. Are they able actually to fund pieces of this work, so that it's not your skin only in the game, because then it may not outlast your implementation.
I feel like I'm going to get slightly dizzy from nodding as much as I am at the moment. So fantastic. Anustup, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to get hopefully some frequent Noam points as I speak. As I reflect on what we know about implementation, I think our education change in general, I think over the last 10, 15 years with the movement in the science of learning, I think as a domain we know an awful lot about how children learn. Much more. We may not accept those principles, we may not apply those principles, but I think in this community, and I consider it's a more reflection on myself and collectively for us, we know very little about how teachers learn and change. That's a black box, and that's not talked about so much, and that's why we're throwing all these things at the problem, and then somehow we hope that it will trickle down. So to earn my frequent Noam points for the day, if you, at least my understanding of implementation is uptake multiplied by fidelity. I think there's a vast amount of resource wasted at the uptake stage that people just don't use the program. If you saw that classroom heat map, we showed that the before and after, there were lots of reds on that. The teachers were just not using the program. And the massive improvements we saw in student learning was just moving people from non-users to users, and then from users to high fidelity users. So I think if we really want to get serious about getting better value add, we need to talk about the specifics. So why do a large number of teachers in India use the I do of the lesson plan more than the you do, right? So on and so forth, right? So I think getting down to these specifics can have very, very high impacts, as is evidenced in the results that we have seen. So my call to action would be that let's get into the details.
I love it. Dhir?
So I'll focus on cost effectiveness as well as return on investments, effective return on investments. For the foundational learning programs that are happening, especially in India, I think it's important to focus now on essential elements. They've kind of been identified, what children's learning materials seem to work best. The GAP brought out a paper on effective reading practices. So how do you ensure that some of these practices are happening at scale? A teacher professional development program is not dependent just on the face-to-face training, which is expensive, cannot be done at several times a year, but including other ways, as I mentioned, cluster meetings, WhatsApp nudges, and short videos, etc. And also an ongoing support to struggling learners. As we implement foundational learning programs in India, we've seen that about 25% kids are learning very little. How do you, instead of doing expensive remediation programs, how do we focus on ongoing support to learners in the classroom during teaching time? And that's a part of the instruction design. So these are ways in which more expensive ways of remediation can really be avoided. The second point I want to make is this, that any investment that is being made by funders or even supported by development partners should focus on strengthening of the system. Even now, the solutions that are being talked about, there isn't enough system capacity. So can we build in, as we go along, building capacity of individuals as well as institutions for curriculum development, training, research, data analysis, etc. That'll get us high returns in the long run. And the last point I want to make is that in linguistically diverse contexts like India's and many other countries in Africa, use of children's languages in a variety of ways. I know Nigeria is kind of now getting opposed to many countries. There is a trend that, it's divisive, it's against unity if you use a lot of languages. But the point is, there are various ways in which, for foundation learning, we can use children's languages to help improve learning for better self-confidence, self-esteem. And if the focus of the designs that are being supported could include this element, it will get us very good returns for foundation learning.
Fantastic. Last but definitely not least on this one as well, Armando?
Well, I come from Mozambique, and I remember in those old times where we are just coming from the civil war. In the rural areas, there was always a small health unit, someone with a box of medicines to give to people. And no matter the disease you had, he would always give you paracetamol. So whoever went there, I'm feeling this pain, I'm feeling my back, okay, he will go to the box and give him the paracetamol. And that seems to be also the same context where the resources are now very scarce now. We all talk about scale. We want solution at scale. But maybe it's linked also with what Anustup was saying. Understanding the details and the context is still very important. We need effective solutions, yes, but not all solutions will work in all contexts. And I think our middle tier implementers need to be given space also to adjust those scalable solutions to their context and make sure that they are not just administering paracetamol to everyone.
I love it. So I think some clear themes, even with some differences in responses, but I think the specificity and that focus on, whether it's implementation science, specifically implementation research, specificity of giving all of our children paracetamol. I think that is obviously a core theme in what we're trying to focus on. So we're going to open up for a bit to questions from the audience. I do have a request. Maybe it's a two-part request. Part one is please make sure that it's actually a question. And second, please try and keep it short, right? We do want to make sure that we have some time to hear from this panel. We've got them here for a reason, and it would be lovely to do so. So maybe let's start with 3 or 4 questions to begin with, and then we'll come back and we'll do another round as well. And we have some microphones here. So apparently Matthew has stolen a microphone before this process even began.
Just moving it around.
Yeah. So please, Matthew, don't be shy now.
Thanks, Jonathan, for the opportunity to deliver a short speech. So I'm Matthew Jukes from the Luminous Fund. The thought I've been having throughout Oakford this week and particularly during your presentations is that as a field, I think the understanding of what it takes to support a teacher has become widespread. Now everyone understands that the initial training, but support and opportunities to reflect is the only way to get teacher behavior change. My sense is that we are at the beginning of that process with understanding how to get behavior change or effective action at the middle tier. And it's quite, people talk about it in quite cursory terms as like capacity building, but I rarely see any detail. So my questions are, do you agree that that's a missing part? And since you all mentioned it in your presentations, I'd love to know if you have any particular insights about what has been effective to encourage behavior change amongst that group.
Thank you. I'm going to just, go section by section. We'll do it that way. I have one here. Perfect.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katarina Gressreit. I'm from the OECD. And
I guess my question is coming from the context of sort of an INGO. So for, at the OECD, we obviously produce lots of data, as you all know, and we sort of sit by kind of nature at the outside of what's going contextually on in different countries and contexts. And I feel like there's a lot more we can do to do a better job of taking what we do have, which in our case is data, and help governments and help like local actors do something with it. So I guess that's kind of my question to you would be, for those of us sitting on the outside of governments, because I think there still are a lot of people from various international organizations here today, what do you need from us? What can we do as we navigate this shift to more of this closer collaboration with governments and especially those who are kind of maybe sitting at the multilateral level? What do you need from us?
Do we happen to have one from over this side? Yeah.
So the discussion has been in collaboration with the government. So usually government always have a norm of investment per child. So when we say about these learning, any data and evidence like X was the cost per child that the government is investing with these kind of intervention that we're proposing, what's the cost now? X plus something or X minus something?
Yeah, maybe one more. We have. Is it additional cost? Whoever gets a microphone first, you win. Congratulations.
Thank you. My question is, it's very amazing sharing. So my question is, what's the big mistake or big feel when you do the maxing the impact? Because you share the very successful lessons, I want to what mistake you made, or what you feel, why you feel, what's the lesson you've learned from them, and what's the limitation as the international organization or local as, organization as the role of NGO to do something, contribute to the education. Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you so much. You noticed that this was a 90-minute session on successes. There will be a 4-day session on mistakes and failures coming up after this. So we'll start with those questions, and maybe I'll repose some, and we'll have maybe 2 people answer each or so if we feel good. So maybe on the first one from Matthew about the middle tier and the question of is it the missing middle, and also what is some evidence of effective approaches that have been able to help shift that behavior change at that level. Anyone? I mean, a hamburger analogy from Anustup.
Yeah, the infamous hamburger. I think that, and those of you who don't know the hamburger, the middle tier is like a patty crushed between 2 competing forces, the people who are the government really driving things through the middle tier and the teachers also pushing back. But I think a couple of things that I'd like to say that oftentimes we need to think of the hammer and the nail, that the nail is teacher support. One of the hammers is going through the middle tier. And like he was suggesting, there's also other hammers, which is that can we go direct to the teacher, so we're even piloting things like remote coaching and all of that. But I think a couple of things that we've learned in the point of contact between the coach and the teacher. And for anyone who's been a coach and a teacher, these are well known. It's just that sometimes in communities like this, we just rediscover things that are already known to people who work in schools. The first is giving short, precise feedback. You have no idea, simple stuff. A lot of programs correct to this. We get coaches into the system and they're saying a lot of things to teachers, being precise, demonstrating, right? Demonstrating a classroom practice. The last one, we saw those reds of teachers who don't use the lesson plan and often, or any pedagogical practice, whether it's a lesson plan or any other pedagogical practice taught, very often they've not had a time to read even 1 page of the teacher resource that was given to me. I have done this many times, and I can guarantee you a 5-minute joint reading with a teacher. These things may sound like some very, very basic stuff, but I think we talk about all this big stuff, but it's really the small stuff that eventually what happens in most programs is we go through a first phase in which we do certain big stuff, it doesn't work, and then midline hits, and midline doesn't work well, and it did hit us. Some of us were sitting in the room, and then we say, okay, what do we do next? We just do these basic things well. So I think we're going to drill down into the specifics.
That's great. Anyone else want to? Yeah.
Well, so first of all, I'm like looking at Karen Mundy sitting back there and all of her work on the middle tier, taking notes. Okay, good, because I want to know her answer to that question. But I have
the missing middle
the
tier,
missing
as
middle,
we
yeah.
discussed the other day.
So no, I mean, I think to answer Matt's first question, yes, I think it's important. And yes, I agree, we haven't done enough to understand it, and Karen's work is part of being at the forefront of that. Maybe one level below the middle tier that I have personally become very interested in on the back of our results from Ghana and Nigeria is the SSO head teacher dynamic. And I think in a lot of contexts, I think there's a very interesting political economy around school support officers in a lot of systems that probably merits some more work in terms of being especially in the development partner project model and like the way that they get activated. I think they've just got a bear of a job going around to schools in very difficult contexts. And head teachers are already there in the school. Now, so can we activate them more in the management role and in the providing feedback role? Now, the counter argument to that is, and to be very clear, and this is where, to Armando's point, context matters a lot. In some places, head teachers are just a teacher with a little more authority. Like they are also full-time classroom teachers. And so in that context, if you go in and say, by the way, on top of dealing with the administrative stuff you already deal with, and on top of teaching in a classroom, you're also supposed to be doing all these coaching activities. I don't think that's a great idea. But so context dependent, I think we could do more to activate head teachers. And sort of on that line, something that if I had more time and I was presenting results and I wanted to be provocative, because these are very preliminary, like just descriptive statistics we've started to look at in both Ghana and Nigeria, one thing that we're seeing is when we ask teachers and head teachers to rate their preference between preferences for more supervision versus more coaching and mentoring, the response was very clearly that they prefer more supervision. Now, controversial, I know you're all gonna come at me and you're gonna ask me all kinds of questions, so that's why I didn't have a graph of it, because now you can't attack me. But I think—
This is being recorded.
Yeah, you can attack me after. No, and obviously we do want to explore that more and understand, did they really understand the question? All of those caveats. But, assuming that this is a true measure of preference, let's just assume that for a minute, there's a couple different reasons why we might see that. Maybe it's because they've never experienced good mentoring and coaching, but they've experienced decent supervision. So like I'll take a good thing over a not good thing, even if I knew what good mentoring was. Maybe I'd prefer that. That's one. And then there's all sorts of different things that come on that. But I think we need to think more about what do these activities really look like. And Anustup, to your point, like are we overloading the mentoring coaching to the point that it's just not useful? Versus providing guidance on doing it simply and effectively. And then, I just think we need way more work on this. And I think in my mental model, that falls under like the managerial component, but also moving that up to not just the management of at the school level, but also like district and province and what are some of the issues that come up. I think it relates to also like materials deployment, which is going to become more and more of a challenge the more structured pedagogy programs we deploy, because they don't really work very well without materials.
Fantastic. So moving to that second question, just to make sure that we have a time to get through them, but we can come back hopefully if there is more in that. Any advice for folks outside countries, potentially in the multilateral space or others, to think about how they can support with either closer collaboration with government or any other key requests for that group? Any thoughts? Yeah.
I think so. Thanks for that question. I think it's an important one. I think the first thing that we need help on is, first of all, to unlearn, and that's your responsibility, because things have changed, right? The time when you would come with the resources to implement a program in a country, that's gone. I think learning now to work with government and changing the development space and support to government is a big responsibility on the side of those that have worked this way for a long time. And I think also becoming an advocate of that approach, because that's going to be the norm in the coming years. There will be some support from the philanthropy that maybe a seed funding or something that just sparks the work. But I think when it comes to implementation at scale, governments would continue to play a big role in it. So I think we'd need some advocacy and change in how we do development going forward, and support on the philanthropy side, but more to spark that an innovation, and then figure out how to take it to government and not to implement through the normal ways. I think that's going to be a big unlearning area.
Yeah, fantastic. Any other thoughts on this one? Yeah, Armando.
Just to add on what Titus just mentioned is, we are talking with a crisis in the background. There's no money, so I want to give you a little bit of more hope. I want to talk about thousands, not thousands of millions of dollars, but thousands of citizens and people who are there to support. As we do this assessment, we are working with 6,000 citizens volunteers in different communities who avail their time and they support the assessment process. The same way, there are others also who are doing that at the village level. And Rajib was telling us a story from Nepal 2 days ago, that an old man in a village just organized and offered his space for the community to help their children to learn, to have remediation programs in their village. A purely community initiative, engaging the youth in the community to support their children. And he was saying that when this old man was asked, why are you doing this? The only response for him was that these children will grow. They will learn and will grow. And they will remember that they learned in my space. So that feeling of pride, of contributing to something big, is also happening, and it can also happen at the village level. Those initiatives sometimes are happening in spaces where are schools, but children are going to school for 5-7 years and they are not learning. So we need to also create that space for the community engagement to happen and support to learning that's coming from different sources to also have space to flourish.
Yeah, I love that. So, Dhir, we have saved you to the end of this, but I don't want you to feel like you have to only answer the cost question, which was the third one. I know you were interested in that middle tier one as well, so feel free if there's...
No, I will address the additional costs and the mistakes, right? So,
perfect, yeah.
The additional cost, Pushpalata, of the state level support is minuscule. We've just got, let's say, 4 to 5, 7 people at the state level supporting the entire government's FLN program. So they're embedded in the system. You can't even calculate how small that is. In a demonstration program, as I mentioned, at a district level, which is about 2,000 schools, the cost of the civil society organization is about 5 to 7% of what the government invests in foundation learning, not including teachers' salary costs. That's a broad... So it is definitely a very small percentage, especially because the model of embedding it within the government. On the mistakes, I'll mention 2. One that we have made and one that we've seen around us. The first one is about supporting struggling learners and remedial programs. Organizations have been very ambitious, saying divide children into 4 groups or 5 groups. So teachers are going to work with children at different levels. Now, that's fine. An assessment shows you that there are children at different levels. You've got a competency-based assessment. But teachers will not implement anything like that, will not be able to do it. So there were challenges around this, of doing work with 3 or 4 levels of children in the same classroom or across classrooms. And therefore, right now, the model that seems to be working at scale, we tweaked that to just 2 levels. Children who are above a certain level of proficiency and those who need extra help. And the teacher then spends 70% of their time with those children who need help and 30% with the others. So just coming to this model, which is less burdensome, likely to be more sustainable, took some time. The second is we started off, that's our organization, with mother tongue-based multilingual education. And that's the obvious thing. All of us in the room know that the best way is for a child to learn in their own language for 5 to 7 years, at least, while they learn the other language to which there can be a transition later. But politically, in many cases, this was not feasible because there was a demand for that more dominant language. So what we've done is, after several attempts, come to a kind of bilingual model where we begin with both languages. Obviously, the L1 is the dominant one. We spend all of our time on L1, but what is projected is this is a bilingual model, and both languages exist in the classroom. The children are learning L1, but they're also learning L2, and at some point they'll learn much more of L2. So that's the kind of learning that we had.
That's great. We only have 2 minutes left, amazingly enough, and so we probably don't have time for more questions. So maybe if just one or potentially 2 people want to head on the mistake thing, and so. Yeah.
No, I think a couple of mistakes I wanted to share. One was the realization that often a lot of instructions to teachers, whether it is through training, whether it is through materials, whether it's through classroom observations, is around what will you do? Like, will you explain, decoding to children, or will you do, concrete pictorial abstract approach, but not enough on what would children do. So I think a big transition happened in program implementation when we were able to split the teacher actions and the child actions. It did 2 things. One, it gave teachers purpose, because very often they see their own actions as just going through a checklist. When they look at children actions, they see purpose. The second is children's action is actually proximate to learning. It is the problem of the you do I was mentioning earlier. That was one thing that we I think was a big realization, which I didn't do earlier. The second was persisting through programs with a one-size-fits-all approach until you realize that there are greens and there are reds and there are yellows in terms of whether teachers or classrooms or schools, and to actually identifying them early on in wherever you are implementing, and then helping your your partners, which is governments, to understand that these schools, these teachers, these classrooms need differentiated support. While I completely agree with Dhir that we can't do very complex things, but just having a few simple things to help coaches and middle management, and Matthew is still in the room, is to help them identify. We didn't do that early on, and then we realized that we're not progressing as much. So those 2 things.
No, that's great. So I think we are sadly at time. I will offer up Armando, Titus, and Marla during the break and light lunch. Please ask them for all the mistakes they've made. They'll be happy to share at that time. But if we could get a round of applause for this incredible group of panelists. Thank you. And are we now moving over to you, Rachel? Is this where we go? So I don't know if Rachel actually needs any sort of introduction. I assume not. But please, we're excited to hear what you have to share with us today.
For those who don't know me, I'm from ex-CBO, and was one of the creators of what works hard and always great, and he was as a sort of successor to the RISE work and all that fantastic work on what works, but really these questions of how an implementation does. And what a pleasure to see not just the panelists who are amazing, but just the people in this audience, just incredible, rich knowledge and expertise. And I thought that there wouldn't be many pictures of children, but realising that we had Titus on the panel, I should have been, or but I start with a picture of next slide of a classroom, some children. I wanted just to take us for a minute to a classroom. Sure. Many of you will have seen before. It's a classroom that I was very impressed by in Kenya, taken there actually by our friends from the Zizi Afrique who might be here and part of the PAL network as well. Why was this amazing? We were walking, it was a very wet, cold, rainy day in Kenya. Many of you know Kirinyaga district. And lively school, fantastically vibrant head teacher. And we were walking past all these lively classrooms to the end of the compound. The beautiful, Kenyan flag flying and those concrete blocks you're all familiar with. And at the end, there was a quiet classroom. I thought there was no one in there. And we went in, and there was this teacher in red, Teacher Lucy. And Teacher Lucy had 107 children in her classroom. You're just seeing a fraction of the children in that photograph. And every child, and you can see from that photo, every child had their eyes honed on Teacher Lucy. Every child also had around their necks a cardboard placard with their name on it. And Teacher Lucy had something that some teachers are really good at, and that was presence. She had a connection with those children. And what was so impressive is she was using those techniques of teaching teaching to the class at first, then a group activity, and then an individual activity. And in that individual activity, she had the children reading using, in Kenya, of course, they call it their tusome finger, but using their finger to track the words. And so she could see which children weren't actually following, couldn't actually read. And as she went around the classroom, she tapped them, those who weren't keeping up, on the shoulder. And she called them her angels. And later she called them out, her angels, out to the front and actually did what we might know as a small TAL initiative to help those children. But there she was, Teacher Lucy. And if we think back to the start of this discussion, Jonathan, and think of Dhir's 4 points. Who remembers Dhir's 4 components? She had all of them. Can anyone remember? I'll remind you. The first, she had really good mid-tier leadership in that school. Secondly, she was using impactful practices. I hope I'm getting them right, dear. Third, she'd had good training with demonstration. And fourthly, that head teacher that we'd observed actually brought together the teachers to look at the learning levels of those children and discuss it and think about what to do. All 4 of Dhir's key components. So that was just to bring some children into the picture. Just going to Noam's point, Noam told us that the main resources are domestic. And I just, given the title of this talk, this is a bit of an old graph, but it's just to illustrate, really, giving a few countries that actually, even in countries that have depended a lot on aid, actually it's really tiny as a proportion of their overall domestic spend. However, I would like to ask all of us, with our evidence, it's about evidence use, are we doing enough to equip ministers of education and ministries of education with the evidence they need to make the case of where and what to resource, also with ministers of finance? Are we doing enough of those, and are we equipping those civil servants who need to make that case? And I also think, who knows the Kenyan clap? It goes like this. And then you send out flowers. But I think when we heard that presentation from Anustup and the work that ASA had done there to the ASA survey and all of Rukmini's and the Pratham team's work to get known the learning crisis, and then the political commitment through that Nippon program in India to make the shifts they've made through incredible good evidence use through CSF, and the way they've done that is just incredible. I mean, that graph just doesn't do justice to the kind of numbers we're talking about. And that is very exciting, and I think we should all give a Kenyan clap to all the teachers at CSF, all the evidence producers, all the teachers and middle tier people who helped that happen. So, all together. So, my final graph was a challenge. You gave us a challenge, Jonathan. You asked us the question, what should we do? How do we respond in the current environment? And we actually have been thinking about this for some time. And as a donor, I think one of the big things we have been thinking of is about how we shift from substitutive aid, which is often what we've been doing service delivery, to being catalytic and working behind and going back to the days. And I'm seeing fantastic academic colleagues over there like Keith Lewin and others who at the beginning were always said work behind government plans, work behind national plans, work with and build the system. And I think that we've moved away from that over the last couple of decades, and that's the place we need to be. And this was a model that actually we developed by looking at models of good practice where evidence really had a big difference. This was a model we'd done with Emma Carter and Pauline Rose and Ricardo Sabetes, many of you will know from the Real Centre, where we looked at actually the complementary basic education program in Ghana, and we unpacked what were the reasons and what had happened to make the evidence and make the government take on board that evidence and scale up a really important out-of-school initiative. And we found there were 4 dimensions to that. Number one, not only that the quality of the research was high, but that demand and supply aligned. Secondly, that there were these relationships of trust built, not through just the formal MOUs that we often think about when we're designing research and we go to government and we say, can we have an MOU to do this RCT? That yes, those formal things are important, but really what's important are those relationships of trust, and we often don't pay enough attention to those, or we don't talk about them very much. Thirdly, that actually you need those evidence champions who can seize the policy windows. And again, I think all of our presenters here have these 4 dimensions of success in the way they are working, but we often disseminate research when we produced it, when we've got it published, or when we've analysed it. That isn't necessarily the point of the policy moment when it is most needed. And so do we have the champions in place to be those super communicators, I call them, to support government to make the right policy choices with scarce resources? And the final one is that evidence to policy process really is relational and contextual, and that networks matter hugely. Last week when I put the question of the panel into AI, it actually and said, what would you recommend we do with, in this world of scarce resources? And one of the things it spewed back out at me was we should strengthen and sustain communities of practice to have a momentum using the research for reform that aren't aligned to donor cycles. And I thought that was very pertinent. So, Jonathan, your scaffolding metaphor, I think, is so important to support these kind of changes and transformations. And Titus, I thought that the way you challenge us to use the graphics to communicate things in a visual way, not just through the great publications that might be produced in journals, but actually how do we communicate that? And doing that in real time, really exciting, and exciting to be offered the opportunity also to be doing more of this with the PAL network too. So I just wanted to end by saying, huge thanks to all of you who are also part of these new ways of working and part of a new community of practice, and it's incredibly exciting to see this going forward. And I love the phrase that was coined by Keith, actually, which was the silently excluded. So let's make sure that no children in the classroom are silently excluded as we go forward. Thank you. And I think Michelle is coming to close.
But hi, everyone. I do have the pleasure of closing us out here today. So I'm Michelle Kaffenberger, the Director of Evidence Translation with the What Works Hub for Global Education. And I want to start with a few big thank yous. So thank you to everyone here in the room. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for staying after an extra day from UCFIT for many of you. I'm so pleased to have such a, standing room only crowd for such an important topic. So thank you to everyone who's joined online. Glad you could join us. And a special big thank you to our wonderful panelists and Jonathan for bringing your fantastic work into this room, letting us learn. It felt a little bit like a whirlwind. It felt a little like speed dating. Like we're gonna learn a little bit from each of you, but not enough to really know. But appreciate, maybe, but just enough to take it out into many more discussions out there. And so to close out and to leave us with just a few reflections, I wanted to use a reflection exercise that I use at home. So this is something from my family to all of you. But has anyone heard of rosebud thorn as a way to reflect on your day or your week? I see some nods. I wasn't sure how common this is. But the rose is like the highlight of your day or the best thing that happened or of your week. The thorn is something bad or disappointing or kind of sad that happened. And then the bud is something that you're looking forward to. So we use this at dinner time often. It's a great way to get kids to actually talk about their school day instead of just how was school? It was good. But what was your rose and your thorn and your bud? So anyway, I'm going to use that to just share 3 quick reflections for us as we go into the time together. So first, and I like to do thorn first to get it out of the way. The thorn, for me on my reflections, is just acknowledging this kind of feel of a bit of a dark cloud of reduced funding that I feel is kind of, I feel it kind of hanging over my head. I felt like it at UCFIT, at the conference, it's kind of always there. We all kind of like recognize that the development sector is going through a pretty significant shift, and it's a lot to navigate, and we're all trying to kind of figure it out together. But a bit of a weight, and it's come out in many of the presentations, but I think just worth acknowledging kind of the elephant in the room, that it's a new operating environment. But moving quickly from that to the rose, which is actually that even in the midst of all of that, my highlight of the week has actually been this session and hearing all of these fantastic examples. Because I think hearing all the fantastic work that is happening, I know I personally am just so pleased and grateful to be even just a small part of this through the hub, of kind of being able to be engaged with and support all the great work that's happening on the ground, and even when it feels quite tumultuous at the global level, to kind of always be reminded and engaged directly with all the great things that are happening at the country level. Children are learning that weren't learning before, programs are expanding and advancing, governments are getting on board and excited and enthusiastic about kind of scaling and embedding these types of programs. I think Marla set that up really well, just seeing the increased demand and then identified needs for support. Hearing about, new learning assessments that are kind of continuing to bring that to the fore, to be acted on, and all the system strengthening examples that we had. So I know that is my rose, and just kind of keeps us, I think, grounded in all the great work that we're trying to support. And then just to close out the bud, the thing that I'm looking forward to is actually a bit of optimism about this moment kind of pushing us to try to do development differently. That's a phrase that's been around for quite a long time. There was a paper that Luis Crutch and Joe DeStefano did many years ago, doing development differently. But I feel like we've talked about it for a long time, but are now kind of being forced to act on it, implementing through governments, taking their needs seriously. And one of the reflections that we've had at the hub is that from the beginning, we've been focused on scale, implementing in and through government systems. It was in our DNA from the start of the hub, so it doesn't actually feel that different. So doing development differently, but it actually has been there all along, but we're leaning into it. We're gonna do more of it. We're gonna focus on it more, but it's not new, it's kind of in our DNA. And so just a note of optimism and excitement to be able to partner with those on the panel and so many of you in the room to kind of advance that in the coming years. And so with that, I will close out our reflections and just say, I think there were a few housekeeping. There's food and drinks out there. We intentionally did this as kind of a quick panel to enable, a whole week of a conference, there's only so many more sessions we need to kind of sit at. So we wanted to intentionally carve out a decent amount of time to let everyone mingle and talk and chat and take these things forward. So a good solid hour of snacks and drinks out in the forum. And I think there's a request, if you haven't actually registered upstairs, if you could do that, that helps everyone, I think, know who's here and who's in the building. And with that, I will close this out. Or Jonathan, I don't know if you want to say a final word? No? Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you out there.